The Apache warrior woman had been known across the desert as Nantan Lira, a fighter whose footsteps were as light as wind on sand and whose courage never bent. On the morning of the ambush, she rode at the front of her people, eyes sharp, instincts alive. The canyon narrowed suddenly, cliffs rising like jaws, and then the gunfire erupted. Horses screamed, warriors scattered, and chaos swallowed the air. A thunderous crack split the ground as a massive boulder broke loose above her. Before she could leap away, the stone crashed down, crushing her legs beneath its weight. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and endless, and her scream echoed off the canyon walls until darkness pulled at her sight. When she woke, the battle was over. Dust hung in the air like a shroud, and the smell of blood and gunpowder burned her nose. Her legs were twisted, broken beyond recognition, numb in places and burning in others. She tried to move, but her body refused her command. By the time her tribe returned, the sun was already sinking. They formed a silent circle around her, faces hard with sorrow and fear. The elders spoke quietly among themselves. In their world, survival was law, and the land showed no mercy to the weak. A warrior who could no longer walk would slow the people, risk the children, invite death for all. They gave her water, placed a knife in her trembling hand, and whispered prayers to the spirits. No one met her eyes as they turned away. One by one, they left her lying on the cold stone, alone beneath the open sky. Lyra watched their backs disappear into the desert, disbelief turning into a hollow ache far deeper than her wounds. Her screams tore from her chest until her throat bled. But the canyon answered only with silence. The sun rose again, cruel and bright. Heat pressed down on her like a weight, and vultures began to circle above, their shadows gliding across her face. Thirst burned her tongue, and fear crept into her thoughts as strength drained from her body. She tightened her grip on the knife, not knowing whether it was meant to fight death or invite it. Tears cut lines through the dust on her cheeks as the desert waited patiently for her final breath, certain that even the strongest warriors eventually fell to its will. The rider came out of the heat haze like a ghost, his horse moving slow and cautious as if it sensed death nearby. Ethan Cole had learned to read the land better than people. Years on the frontier had taught him that vultures never circled without reason, and when he saw them dipping low, his jaw tightened. He followed their path until he found her lying among the rocks, blood dark against the sand, eyes blazing even as her body failed her. When she raised the knife, her hand shook, but the fire in her stare stopped him cold. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Ethan could see the truth of her injuries without looking twice. The legs were crushed, beyond saving, and infection already threatened. Helping her would mean risk from every direction. She was Apache, a warrior, and sheltering her could bring retaliation from soldiers or her own people. He could leave. The desert would finish what the canyon had started. No one would blame him, but something in her refusal to beg broke through his caution. She didn't plead for mercy or cry for help. She simply watched him, daring him to walk away as everyone else had. Ethan dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible, and fired 2 quick shots into the air to drive the vultures back. The sound echoed across the rocks, sharp and final. He knelt beside her, tore strips from his shirt, and pressed them against the worst of the bleeding. She fought him at first, weak blows against his chest, curses spilling from her lips in a language he barely understood. The work that followed haunted him for years. With no doctor and no time, Ethan did what had to be done. He used his knife, his belt, his teeth clenched so tight his jaw ached. Her screams tore through the canyon, raw and desperate, until they broke into hoarse silence. When she finally lost consciousness, he nearly collapsed beside her, hands slick with blood, heart hammering like he had just outrun death itself. As the sun dipped low, Ethan lifted her carefully onto his horse, steadying her body so she wouldn't fall. Every step back to the saddle felt heavier than the last, not from her weight, but from the choice he had made. He turned his horse toward his ranch, knowing there was no turning back now. Whatever storms followed, he had chosen to stand between them and a woman the desert had already claimed, and refused to let her die. When she woke, the world felt wrong. The ceiling above her was low and wooden, the air thick with the smell of stew, smoke, and unfamiliar safety. For a moment, panic surged through her, and she tried to sit up only to collapse back onto the bed with a cry. Her body felt lighter in some terrible way, as if part of her had been stolen while she slept. Memory returned like a blade, and rage followed close behind. She shouted, her voice raw, and reached for a weapon that wasn't there. Ethan came into view slowly, careful not to startle her. He spoke softly, words she barely understood. His hands opened to show he meant no harm. She answered him with fury, spitting curses and tears, pounding her fists against the mattress until exhaustion stole her strength. When he offered food, she turned her face away. When he tried to help her sit, she shoved him back with all the power she had left. To be alive like this felt worse than death. A warrior without legs was no warrior at all. Days blurred into weeks. Pain became a constant companion, but Ethan never left her side. He cleaned her wounds, changed the bandages, and spoke to her even when she refused to listen. At night, she heard him working outside, the scrape of tools and the steady rhythm of effort. When she finally dragged herself to the doorway one afternoon, she saw what he had been building. From broken wagon wheels and worn planks, he had crafted a chair that rolled. Beside it lay 2 wooden legs, rough but carefully shaped. Learning to use them was agony. She fell more times than she could count, anger driving her to rise again and again. Her hands blistered, her arms burned, and shame flooded her when she collapsed in the dirt. Ethan never laughed, never rushed to pick her up unless she asked. He simply waited, watching with a quiet faith that confused her more than his kindness. Each failure cut deep, but each small victory lit something fierce inside her. One evening, as the sky bled red across the plains, she stood without his help. Her body shook violently, sweat stinging her eyes, but she remained upright. She looked at Ethan then, truly looked at him, and saw not a savior, but a man who had chosen to believe she was more than her loss. In that moment, something within her shifted. She was no longer only surviving, she was learning how to live again on her own terms. The first warning came with the wind. It carried the sound of hooves and distant voices, sharp enough to make Ethan's hand drift toward his rifle. Lyra felt it too, a familiar tension settling into her chest. She had learned the land again, learned how to move differently, how to fight without speed, without mercy. When shadows appeared along the ridge, she did not retreat into the house. She rolled herself onto the porch, fitted her wooden legs, and reached for her bow. The raiders came fast, expecting fear, expecting weakness. Instead, they met silence and precision. Lyra loosed her arrows with deadly calm, each shot chosen, each breath controlled. Ethan fired beside her, steady and unflinching. The ranch echoed with gunshots and war cries. But by dawn, the attackers were gone, leaving only churned dirt and broken pride behind. Lyra sat in the quiet afterward, hands trembling not from fear, but from the knowledge that she had survived another battle. Word spread across the plains, carried by traders and frightened men. Stories grew of an Apache woman who stood on carved legs and fought like fire. When her tribe finally returned, they came cautiously, as if approaching a spirit. The elders stood before her, eyes filled with disbelief. They had expected bones, not strength. They had expected silence, not a woman who met their gaze without bowing her head. Lyra spoke calmly, her voice firm despite the weight of the moment. She told them of the canyon, of the desert that tried to claim her, and of the man who refused to let her die. She did not beg for forgiveness or demand answers. She simply stated the truth. They had chosen survival over her life, and she had chosen her own path in return. The elders listened, unable to deny what stood before them. When they offered her a place among them again, she shook her head. The pain of abandonment still lived in her bones, deeper than any wound. She turned away, not in anger but in certainty. Ethan waited nearby, saying nothing, giving her the space to choose. She joined him without hesitation. As they rode away together, the sun rose over the open land, vast and unforgiving, yet full of possibility. Lyra was no longer the warrior she had been, and she was no broken survivor either. She had become something new, forged by loss, loyalty, and defiance. On the frontier, her story would be told for generations, not as a tale of pity, but as a legend of a woman who refused to be erased, and a man who stood beside her when the world turned its back.